wherever you are, whether you're in lockdown or not in lockdown, it's great you're here, and I hope you really benefit from this morning. I'm going to pass over to Oliver, who will introduce Mike.
Thanks, Peter, and greetings, everyone. You notice that, there's always a few swallows before the spring, and Peter's put on his coat. So that means that we're approaching the end of COVID, and we are, well, perhaps not we're ending end of COVID, but we're approaching the end of this version of lockdown. So we in Sydney are feeling really optimistic and grateful that things are going well, and we hope wherever you are that there are signs of hope as well. Now, the COVID days and the lockdowns, I think have produced many consequences, and will probably continue to roll through our society. But one of them, I think, is the degree to which people have felt loneliness, and especially single people. And I've talked to a few of my friends who live alone, and they say how incredibly lonely they've been. And therefore, I think the issue of friendship has become extremely important during this time, and our ability to get together with our friends, meet with them, walk with them, etc., has really been a feature of these days as we look back. And I think that also applies to our fellowship, to our group. We are about friendship, and during these lockdown days, these friendships have been deepened, and made more important. And I mention that because in welcoming you to this group, I want you to sort of reflect on the fact that we are a group that is primarily about friendship and getting to know each other and becoming people to each other and deepening our relationship with each other. Now, we do have a theme that runs through our fellowship and our friendship, which is that as men on the road, we are exploring faith and faith in God, and how this does or does not affect the way we live our lives. And so that's for those of you that are new, that's the sort of takeaway message, that this is what we're about, and we hope that you'll enjoy that, learning and deepening your understanding of what we're talking about in that respect. Now, before I briefly mention a bit about Mike, I do want to welcome everybody wherever you are sitting, whether you're Bridge Street Fellowship, the original group, whether you're from all these cities that are now joining us, whether you're from overseas, and we have a few overseas people, and especially if you're new to this group and you're wondering what this group is all about. So I think you'll find that we're a pretty laid back group, that we're open and friendly, and we just want you to enjoy what we do this morning, and perhaps join us again in the small group meetings that we hold in alternate weeks. Now, I want to introduce our speaker today, Mike Baird. Mike has spoken to us before. We were just talking about it before we came on, and Mike was a speaker around 2014 when he was Treasurer of New South Wales. And so 7 years have gone by, and a lot of things have happened in Mike's life and in the life of the state since then. Mike comes from a very well-known family in New South Wales. His siblings are all involved in one way or another, or most of them are involved in various elements of civil life. And I think it's incredible that his family has made such a contribution. Before he became Premier, he had a career in banking. And then, of course, we had this time when he was a leader of the state, which we'll hear more about. And then he returned to the world of banking, and then more recently has become CEO of HammondCare. Now, I was involved in that industry as well for a time, as being on a board of Uniting, and I know that HammondCare was really making a name for itself as an organization noted for its pioneering work and its leadership in the aged care, retirement, disability areas, and more recently in complex dementia and palliative care. So they're always on the cutting edge of what are the real issues affecting the population as we all age. Mike, we're really looking forward to hearing what you have got to say to us, and welcome everybody. Back to
Thank
you,
you.
Peter.
Thank you, Oliver. Well, Mike, good morning.
Morning, Peter, and thank you, Oliver.
You're situated in Manly, is that correct?
Well, North Curl.
North Curl.
Yeah.
Okay. How are you and the family faring up in lockdown?
Well, like everyone, it's not easy, but you can be in, obviously worse circumstances. I mean, there's, lockdown stories from across the world that are really tough. And, we've sort of enjoyed parts of it. My son probably hasn't had the ideal HSC preparations. That's probably not been great for him. We've done a lot of dog walking, which we've really enjoyed in the mornings. Although my wife did break a leg in 3 spots hiking with a friend when we're able to have a friend. So, we've had a few dramas, but we're all together and still smiling. So I think that's probably part of the battle. If you're still smiling, it's all okay.
Yeah, quite an achievement. Sounds like quite an eventful lockdown for you. Are you kind of happy that was one of the council mergers you got through between Manly up to Palm Beach?
Yeah, well, that does help. There's like a 30-kilometre stretch. So, the LGA distance. A few people made comments of that, in the dog park. Oh, thank you. It's great. We can go up and down. So,
yeah. So, Mike, we obviously had the opportunity to arrange this morning some months ago. You obviously got quite a busy diary, and no one would have anticipated when we did so the events of the past week. Change of Premier, of course. What do you make of what's happened in the past week?
Oh, look, it's, to be honest, it's hard not to get emotional. I just feel devastated, really, really devastated. And, Gladys was a very close friend of mine. The circumstances are terrible. But look, she's, a very strong woman, and I'm sure she'll go on to new chapters, but it's obviously a very difficult period. For those that are close to her and know her, in terms of government, the new leader is someone, I was very close to, and, I brought him into cabinet when I was Premier, and, it was very clear to me that he was a Premier in waiting. So I think he will do an exceptional job, but it's tough. It's a very tough period to take on government in that role. But he's still got good people around him, and very capable. So very positive on what he'll do, but obviously, personally quite devastated.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting to see the outpouring of grief for Gladys, which was, I think, very heartwarming.
Yeah.
Oliver mentioned in the introduction that you come from a family that has made a mark on our society, and you grew up as the son of a former federal minister. Tell us a little bit about what was that like, your upbringing?
Well, look, it was a strong family, very warm family, a happy family. And, my mum was actually very central to it. I lost my mum a few months ago, and, you speak about loneliness. We spoke about loneliness. I've feel this deep sense of loneliness and grief and loss of my mum. She's someone that cared for us deeply, had belief in each and every one of us. My sister's a journo, my brother's now the CEO of IJM, and each of us, I think, could give that sense of wanting to contribute and help others and care for others, from her. She helped orphans in the tips of Cairo in Egypt. She visited prisoners across New South Wales year in, year out. So she was an incredible woman, and was a real guiding light. My father obviously was in politics, and, we were very proud of the work he did. That took away his presence, but we all reflected how proud we were, and some of the stance he took. He took incredible strong stance on refugees, at personal cost in terms of kind of roles and responsibilities he was going to have. He won the Olympics. He was a minister for the Olympic bid, so he did some incredible things. But I also saw all the negatives, and for anyone that knows politicians or it's someone in the family, and it's there are many, many dark days and times. And I used to remember seeing him go down to the bottom of the driveway at 4:30 in the morning. For us, we flip over and turn on the iPad, and there's all the news details. But in the old days, you used to have to go down and wait for the papers to be physically delivered. So he'd go down at 4:30 in the morning. They'd come at about 4:45, 5 o'clock. And you knew that he was in for a bad day, and the headlines was going to be all this grief. And not a lot of fun again when you saw him sort of pacing back and forth. And as I went through that, I thought, well, there is no way on this earth that I would ever want to go into politics. That is something for others. I'm proud dad that he did it, but it's certainly something I wasn't. But I also saw the good you could do. And, so I think that upbringing, strong family, guided by mum in, the values and kind of how to live life. As a Christian family, church was also an important part of that.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. That wonderful description. A very wholesome and no doubt a wonderful upbringing. So you said that perhaps the experience you had of seeing your father's, coping with all the difficulties didn't really incline you towards politics. But there was a turning point that came. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think, that sense of wanting to contribute, and as a Christian kind of live my faith, how in my kind of end times am I going to look back and think that I've helped others, helped my community, state, country, however it was. And as I was in finance, I really wrestled with that. How am I doing that in a finance context? What is it that I could do? So I really enjoyed the banking side, but I didn't feel a connection to kind of a bit of that greater purpose. And in terms of living my faith, I thought, maybe there's other ways to do it. And certainly as I wrestled, I was working at Deutsche Bank at the time, and I made the decision that I was actually going to go to theological college over in Regent in Vancouver and become a minister. And it was a place where there were people just taking a year off their career, becoming ministers or missionaries, from people around the world. And I thought, what an amazing place to go and train and to come back and kind of work in a church. But when I told Deutsche Bank, it was a very interesting meeting. For those that have work in progress meetings on a Monday morning, we kind of went around the table, and I said, oh, by the way, I'm going to theological college. It was to say you could hear a pin drop would be an understatement. So anyway, it was a big life-changing moment, and Karen and I went excited about the future. But when I went there, I wrote a paper, and you have to write a paper on your life. What's brought you to this point? Where do you want to go? And reflections on your faith and family. And I wrote that, and at the end of the paper, I said, I really look forward to serving as a church minister. And, next to that, the lecturer who kind of read all these papers from all the students on the way in, put in, in Australian politics. And that moment kind of hit me like a sledgehammer. I mean, I'd obviously mentioned that my father was in politics in my life and kind of some of the observations, but nothing like that. And that was a bolt from the blue. And when I received that, I was like, wow, do I really have to consider that? And that was the next sort of 10, 11 months was just a reflection on that point. Where is it, do you think, that I can use my experiences, what I've done, my faith to serve? And it became very clear, indeed clearer and clearer as the time went on, that actually I think it's in politics. So, there was an intervention in terms of thinking and meeting with many incredible people and their stories and taking time to reflect. It kind of set sail that, no, I think that's where I can make a contribution.
Wonderful. A very wise reflection that lecturer made on your paper. So
he's an amazing guy, like Lauren Wilkinson. He lives out on his own island effectively, and it's all sustainable. He even makes his own boats, makes his own apple juice. Like he's no TVs, no screens. So he's an incredible incredible character. So no, I very much appreciate time with him just as much as his comment on the on the paper.
Yes, yeah. So you had this growing sense that perhaps it is going to be politics after all, but it wasn't plain sailing for you. It took quite some time for you to break in. Was that a good thing, do you think, in hindsight?
Yeah, one doubt. I mean, like anyone probably on the court. I mean, there are moments where you think you're going for a job or sporting opportunity or life opportunity more broadly, and you think this is it. And I was very clear. I thought, no, politics is where I'm at. So I joined, got involved locally, and then there was a couple of pre-selection, and I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to win the pre-selection and kind of march in. And I got absolutely hammered. Like almost embarrassingly so. So I think I got a couple of votes of sympathy. So I was like, wow, this is strange. And then there was another pre-selection, probably about 6 to 8 months later. Anyway, and I thought, well, okay, well, this must be it. And this was for my local community. And I did a bit better, but still hammered in that pre-selection. And so that was a couple of years after coming back. And I thought, well, what's all that about? Is that actually what I'm meant to do or not? And it felt very deflating, very dispiriting, and quite questioning. Was that time real, and was what I meant to do? But there was then another opportunity a few years later on. I mean, it took almost 10 years. When that one came along, I'd had a sort of big job opportunity. I was at HSBC at the time, and they wanted me to go to Hong Kong to run Asia Pacific for their institutional bank. And it was an amazing role, but at the same time, the Manly, and they had spoken to me, the party, about doing other seats and moving into safer opportunities. But I said, no, if I'm going to run, I want to run in my local community. Surely that's what it's about. You have to represent your local community and take that. So it came up again. I was a long way behind in the pre-selection numbers, and I had this job opportunity. I thought, you know what, I'm going to go to the job. I just don't think this is meant to be. And then my father got a call from John Howard the day after it decided to pull out, and said, I understand your son's running in Manly. We need good people like him in politics. Encourage him to keep going. And my father called me, and I thought, wow, okay, well, if the Prime Minister of the day's got the time to worry about some, poor young pre-selection candidate in a state seat, the least I can do is keep going. And miraculously won, and then the rest went on from there. But I think if I had have won pre-selection before, those first two times, I wouldn't have been ready. And I think that the time and experience, because I worked overseas, I worked in London for just over 3 years, kind of ran a global business. And I think in a tough market and tough environment. And so I had all types of additional experiences, leadership experiences, regulator experiences, that I think prepared me in a much more significant way than I would have been if I'd sort of just fallen straight in the pre-selection. So there seemed to be some sovereignty in the timing, and certainly as I reflect, I'm very thankful that I didn't win early on, because I think the chance to impact would have been significantly reduced.
Mm-hmm. You were being prepared for it, so to speak.
Well, it felt like it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
in hindsight, not at the time. You can't see it at the time.
Yes. Yeah. So in our conversations, you've sometimes mentioned that you have a sort of a deep sense of purpose, and a sense that you're compelled to do certain things, and indeed the perseverance for 10 years to break into politics, notwithstanding the initial reluctance. Can you explain a bit more what you mean by that you sometimes feel kind of something deep inside that this is what you're meant to do? Can you explain that a bit more?
Well, certainly at all key moments, from that initial wrestle, it is a sense of taking time in terms of prayer, reflection on scripture, talking to friends I trust and respect, their counsel, and just being open and listening. I really want the steps to kind of reflect, where I can contribute, how I can be used, and kind of live my faith. And in that context, it's not, each decision point has come with significant investment in thinking and praying and reflecting on those opportunities. So that's probably where it's come across sort of key moments. And if you think of the politics one, well, that was almost a 10-year kind of journey, and 1 year, which was almost a full year of reflection. So that it was deeply ingrained and embedded, and I was convinced that that's what I couldn't have done anything without my wife Karen. That to me was very important, and I think all of us, there's no point just doing a job. I think what skills and talents, where are we energized, what connects us in a way that is deeply meaningful to the work we do. I mean, we're created and built for work. How can we actually live that out in a way that it's not just a job, there's a broader vocation to kind of what we're doing. And that's always been a part of my thinking since those days.
Mm. So this sense of kind of conviction, particularly say when you were acting as Premier, led you to tackle some really important social issues. Sometimes did it lead you into tricky situations as well?
Well, of course, yes, yeah. And look, I think that the part of the, I mean, like a role, as Premier, I mean, there's all types of things that are going to come across your desk. And, I mean, things like greyhounds wasn't something that I would have thought about much, in fact, I know my mum actually, one of her vices, not being such an amazing woman, is that she actually used to like kind of betting on horses and, well, the Melbourne Cup. She loved the Melbourne Cup. Always tickled her fancy. And she went to a greyhound race once with Dad when he was in politics, and she loved it. She had a great night. So that was really my own reflection. So, like, and in that, it's not a sense, any issue that comes before you, it's not, I don't think, well, what, do we have to do in this situation anything more complex than, what is right, what do you believe in? And they're kind of the two principles that I stuck to. What is right and what do I believe in? And that's kind of the framework I took. As a Christian, I think you're there to govern for all. It's not necessarily just, well, we have to legislate a Christian position on this. It's the broader context of, personally, and collectively, what do we think is right? And do I believe in that? And if that's the case, that was kind of the actions it took. Now, obviously using that example, the action to move on the industry before the community kind of really understood the challenges of what we did, led to all types of complications, and made it a really tough period for government. But even now, when I kind of look back on it, notwithstanding it was kind of banned and then kind of not banned, in essence, it's about shining a light on practices that were terrible and trying to improve the welfare in a sector and speak up for those that couldn't speak, innocent animals. And I still think that's one of the proudest times, because there's been a significant uplift in welfare, and ultimately that, at the time it looks messy and terrible, and I was certainly eviscerated for a few months there, but I don't regret that. In fact, I look back and that's probably one of the prouder achievements, because the actual outcome, was actually better than I could have imagined, in the sense of before I'd even sort of looked about it, thought about it. So it is messy, but I think, keeping that sense of grounding and also a bit of detachment as well, because any leadership position, and there'd be many leaders across the call, it's lonely. You're going to be criticised pretty much every day. So maintaining perspective, being close and listening to those that you trust around you is really important.
We'll come back to that just in a moment, but you also, I think, played a key role in welcoming refugees during your time as Premier, and I assume that also comes from this same sense of being able to speak up for those who are vulnerable and on the margin.
Yeah, no, totally, Peter, and I think that's a good example where the Syrian humanitarian crisis, millions of people destitute with nowhere to go, and I sat here as that debate kind of raged across the country, and to me it was a moment that mattered. I mean, that's often what I reflect on it. As a leader, there are going to be moments that matter, and do you respond, to that moment that matters, or do you not? Because often those moments, it's very easy not to respond. And I thought, well, as the Premier, there's a chance to influence this debate. I'm coming back to what I was right and what I believed in. I totally believe that as a nation, our riches and resources puts an obligation on us to help those that are much less, very vulnerable, in incredibly difficult circumstances with nothing, and being persecuted and tortured and terrorized. And so, I decided to step up for that. What is right? What do I believe in? Well, that's what I thought was right, and certainly what I believed in. And there was a chance to talk publicly on that, to come out and Tony Abbott, who was the Prime Minister at the time, and I knew that it was going to be a challenge to the federal government. They had a different position on it. In private conversations, he was actually wonderful about it, and actually ended up doing something very significant. Indeed, I got my hair cut. Well, you couldn't tell now, but when you could get haircuts, remember those days, up in Coffs Harbour, about 12 months ago. And when I was there, this guy was cutting my hair, and he was telling me how fantastic it is to be in Australia. Anyway, long and short, he was one of those refugees that came, and he said each day he is absolutely praising God for the opportunity to be here, because this is the best country in the world, and his life has never been better. So there was something quite beautiful about that. There was a moment where you stood and made a contribution, and another where there's a man in front of me and his family that came with him, whose lives have changed forever. And it was pretty amazing.
I could imagine that felt very affirming, and in a sense a gift from God that you had that experience with that man. So you've also commented that your wife has sometimes observed that you seem to be called into situations to clean up the mess. I assume she doesn't mean domestically. What do you think that's true? Is that a fair assessment if you think back on the various stages of your career now?
Well, look, it probably feels a bit like that. I mean, the first local pre-selection at CETA was a very messy affair. There'd been politics going on for everywhere. It was a highly charged political environment. The seat had been decided by less than 1,000 votes, 4 elections in a row, so like 16 years. So it was an incredibly tough environment. Obviously, politics, the state finances were in pretty diabolical shape. When I came in, the economy was kind of at the bottom. There was no infrastructure that was built, having promised a lot of things. And then, we kind of left politics to go to Banking Royal Commission, and then left banking to go to Aged Care Royal Commission. So Kevin said that, if you're going to do another job, can you please ensure that it doesn't involve a Royal Commission? Which is fair enough. But I see, in all those, I see opportunities. I think the Royal Commission of Aged Care is going to make it a better sector. And I see, huge opportunities in that. Not just in terms of reform and funding, but a chance to remind the whole of Australia how much our elderly are valued and how important they are. So I guess it's a fair reflection, but I seem to enjoy those situations, Peter. Maybe that's it.
Mm-hmm. Now, you did make a comment earlier about what you think is important as a leader to have sort of a sense of detachment. I want to sort of explore this element a bit further. So you're brought into lots of situations to clean up mess. So you've been under enormous pressure at times as a leader, and as Premier, of course, you faced constant scrutiny. How did you manage to stay calm and focused when you are under such pressure?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a few ways. I mean, there's the personal side is making sure. For me, it was running and surfing helped in terms of staying calm and focused. To me, that I'd often go into a run and with a problem and come out with a solution. Surfing, when you jump in the ocean, it's almost like all the stress kind of washes off you. So that was really important. I also think just listening to the voices that you trust. There's in those sort of roles, and obviously many of the leadership roles on the call, there's lots of voices that come at you, and so it's really important that you've got a group that you trust and respect and can tell you exactly views and perspectives on key issues. That helps to keep you focused on what matters and not distracted, because the moment that there's this outcry or this sort of group that's up in arms, you can kind of just follow it everywhere, whereas you've really got to stay sort of focused on the issues that matter. I think they're the two practical things, but I think more importantly probably is this sense which I've actually texted to Dom this week, and that is that your role does not define you. You've got a role and responsibility, and many here today do. But it's who you are and what you do is what's important. And every single person you meet, as a leader, which is what I told Dom, just understand that they're just as important as you. And that it doesn't matter. I gave this award to the maintenance manager at a local primary school, and he'd lived an hour and a half away, and he'd come to this local primary school every day for 25 years, and he had relationships in the playground with the kids. He cared for them. They loved him, unlike any one I've seen. And when I came to give him a Premier's Award, as a maintenance manager at this school, to say the school erupted, there were tears and there were moments of incredible joy that I still hold very dearly. But it's just a reminder that every person has deep value, deep dignity, and is no more important than you. And to me, that's the grounding, because you can become confused that you're kind of elevated. You're not. You just have a role, and holding that role loosely. It's a stewardship. You're a stewardship level. You're someone that just has this role and this responsibility for a whole range of circumstances. But I think that mindset that it's not making you any better. It just gives you opportunities to help others, and every single person you meet in that sort of mindset. So I think that probably was the most helpful.
It is a hard lesson, though, to learn, because particularly for men, and we're all men on this call, there is such a close identification between who we are and what we do. And particularly when we enter retirement, we really feel that. So how do you think you can cultivate that sense of detachment, that you are not the role?
Well, I think it's more just getting in and understanding other people's stories, as much as yourself. I remember meeting, people like Joe Biden and Prince Harry, and all those sort of high level people. Went to a G20, and every kind of world leader you kind of engage with. But I think the trap is you start to think that you're part of that set, as opposed to, I'm got an opportunity to help and support and recognise this maintenance manager, or Dawn in my local community, who started a walk group. She thought we needed more smiles in the community. So she started a group that walked from Queenscliff Beach to Shelley Beach and back every morning. And sometimes they'd hand out flowers, sometimes they'd hand out lollies, sometimes they'd just sort of wave and smile. That group grew to about 150 people, and it changed the shape of the fabric of the community and a lot of the discussion. And there was much more joy. And like, so she had an incredible role. And, so I think it's constantly looking at the people, not the roles, not the titles, not the companies. And that discipline, I think, kind of shapes you into a perspective of understanding that brings you away from, I am the CEO of X, as opposed to I'm Mike in this role. And let me introduce you to Gina, who's our frontline care worker, and she is literally the most incredible person I've ever met. So I think that there is a real trap in it, and I think that purposeful thinking and discipline, I think helps. And certainly that was one of the things I said to Dom this week. Hold it loosely. Hold the opportunities strongly, and I think that's part of the means for success.
And no doubt your strong sense of own personal identity and grounding that, and I sense ultimately, I suppose that comes from your feeling that you're accepted by God. So that gives you a security. Totally.
That's the key element. I am created by Him, loved by Him. Jesus has died for me, and that's where my eternity is. That's my ultimate identity. So I think that alongside those practices is probably what's driven me.
Just picking up on that last word, that's what's driven you. This week with the election of, if I can call him Dom as our new Premier, journalists have thrown around the word ambition a little bit, saying that, he was always ambitious to be Premier. I'm not asking you to comment on that, but do you see a difference in your own life between perhaps being driven to do something and being ambitious? Is there a distinction between these things?
Yeah, I think there is. I certainly came to an answer, like I wanted to lead, but I didn't necessarily want to be Premier. There's no doubt. When I ended up there, I was surprised. Indeed, a month earlier, I was contemplating kind of leaving at the following election. So it was kind of the furthest thing from my mind. And it doesn't mean you don't think about it or reflect on it. But yeah, I think to your nuance, I want to be Premier. And I can think of some former Prime Ministers that they wanted to be Prime Minister. But, actually what, leading and caring and changing and shaping. And if you're given an opportunity at a higher level, it just is a continuation of what you're doing as opposed to the ultimate goal. I think that's the distinction. You hold, and wherever you are, you've got the opportunity to influence and shape. And if you're given more responsibility, you keep doing what you're doing. And I think that's the distinction. The end goal, whatever it takes, as opposed to a natural consequence of where you're going and serving, and that keeps growing. So that would be my reflection. But in terms of Dom, yes, he certainly was keen to be Premier, but I think he had the balance right. I think it was kind of he's very loyal, and I think he's ready for the job. Notwithstanding, he feels young.
Yes, yeah. So I'm going to open it up in just 1 second for the men to ask questions, and I can see some have already used the raised hand function. So please do that. My last question, and you kind of already alluded to it in your last answer. From the outside, it really appeared that you resigned very abruptly. So how, and perhaps why, did you know that was the time to do it?
Oh, look, on every level. Like I'd always. I never wanted it to be a career. I'd seen too many career politicians that sort of lost their effectiveness, their edge, their chance to influence and shape, and were just there. And I didn't think that was good for community, state, or country. So I'd always had a sense I had a set term. I didn't know what the set term was. There was a whole range of things I wanted to achieve in politics, not least of which was, actually the get the infrastructure built that we needed. And so when I got to that period towards the end of 2016, all I'd kind of set out on 10 years earlier, I'd pretty much achieved, and indeed more than that. So at a personal level, that desire to get the funding to build infrastructure, roads, schools, hospitals, metros, arts facilities, sports facilities, all those sort of things. Like I thought, well, that was set up. And, so my main driver to get to that point was achieved. But then on a personal level, I was absolutely done. And, I didn't really share that as much. But on a family level, I had my mum who'd become unwell and, was on a slide down that had taken a toll on me. My sister was really unwell. She was in a cancer battle. And my kids that had all types of sacrifices for so long, I thought they needed me. So the package and how impacted I was, things like the siege and others had taken a huge toll on me personally, and I was done. So I just knew that it was the time, as I reflected on what I'd set out to achieve, where I was personally and family-wise, it made sense. And transitioned well, and glad it did well.
No doubt you were putting that own sense of detachment into practice. You lived by that same principle, that you weren't the person defined by the role. Thank you, Mike, for sharing all of that. So we will turn to some questions. We have, so you can have a sense of timing, Mike, 15 minutes, and we've got questions coming. So we'll try to go through these reasonably promptly. I'm going to ask first up for Rob, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for that. We all know aged care has many challenges. I wonder what gives you the greatest joy as working as a leader in social services at the moment.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rob. Good to see you. And good to see the barber hasn't been to you either. Look, it's really, really inspiring. Like I've been out on the floor with our team, and I see people in some of the most complex situations, kind of living with dementia, and the care, the battle to give them choice and independence and dignity. Even now, I can feel my heart racing. There is something so wonderful that, as a society, as a collective, in a very generic sense, we're saying they don't matter. There's they're too unwell. They're not really part of us anymore. And our battle is the exact opposite. They deeply matter, and we're going to do everything to give them the best quality of life we can. Through to the way we design our carpets and the lights and the hallways and their rooms. We're going to give them a home, and we're going to love them and give them the best possible care. I just cannot think of anything more meaningful. And I really want the opportunity to go to universities across the country and tell the next generation. Like, imagine, having the opportunity to change and shape someone's life on a daily basis. It's not an insignificant thing. So Rob, I just feel so blessed and privileged to use whatever I've done in the past to try and help my front line, whether they be in palliative care wards or in dementia homes or home care, to help that group, deliver and care for people when they really need someone is an unbelievable privilege. So absolutely loving it.
A question from Warren.
Okay, am I unmuted? Good.
Yes.
All right, it follows on from that, Mike. You are in aged care, but aged care really does face a significant financial challenge because the business model's been pretty much built around earning investment returns from decent interest rates on the residential deposits and others. The government, or the jaws, if you like, of government funding and operational costs have been getting tighter and tighter and tighter, but also so have the investment earnings. So what's the aged care sector actually going to do to be able to thrive and survive going forward, given that the financial situation is really, really challenging?
Yeah, no, it is, Warren, and it's one of the things that strikes you. I mean, there's about 60% of residential facilities that aren't profitable, and that gives you a sense. I mean, there are some good operators in there. It is a very, very tight financial model. The government has started to address it in terms of additional funding, but it's not long term. I think one of the things that they missed was an opportunity to actually put in a dedicated revenue stream. I think that the opportunity with the Royal Commission and the concerns was actually to put in, however it was structured, a hypothecated revenue stream to aged care long term. I think that would help. What they've said in terms of the RADs in the future, they've basically parked it. So ultimately, they're going to have to deal with it. But in the short term, the influx of funding, I think, is going to help to a point. I think the biggest reform where it all is going to take shape is the independent pricing. So the government and ERCs and committees, they're not going to be making decisions what can they get away with or what's the minimum we can give to the sector. They're going to have to do it against a benchmark of what does it cost to provide quality care. Now, how that's mixed in terms of RADs and others, well, that's probably a longer term strategic thing, but that to me, that's the biggest reform, because that's how we will start to get the funding that's needed to provide that full stop. So I think that was probably the best thing to come out of the Royal Commission, but you've rightly articulated it's still work to be done. So thanks, Ron.
A question from Paul.
Mike, as you were speaking about your roles, I think compared to banking or to politics, HammondCare is a public of the enterprise as a Christian organisation. I was thinking about Roy Williams, who's spoken here before, and also been out for Chris's to speak at one of our seminars. I mean, he's argued that the most important thing for Christian mission in Australia in the coming years is whether our Christian social service organisations and schools maintain their Christian identity and do a good job of articulating that in word and deed. How do you see that playing out in HammondCare? That's a different sort of organisation, and your role's a different sort of role to your ones in politics and in banking.
Yeah, no, it's a different role, Paul. And certainly prayers at the beginning of meetings weren't common at the NAB, and didn't happen at cabinet. Certainly, some cabinet members you'd have moments, but that was a very stark change, one that I very much enjoyed as I've come in. No, but I think that it's an interesting point, the Christian identity and the way. What I love about HammondCare is it's not talking, it's walking. And the way that we hold dear the quality of life, the value of life, the value of that deep value of the person in front of us, I think is maintaining it. And I'll give you a quick sense. One particular facility I went to where there's a guy who was called Pops, and he was out in the backyard every day and used to rip the hedge apart and chuck it around. And I saw it and I said, "Oh, what's happening here?" And he said, "Oh, well, no, Pops does that every day. None of the residents worry about it. They're very happy for him to do it, so we let them do it." And I thought, "Oh, wow, that's really kind of individualized relationship-based care." And they said, "No, but it gets even more powerful because he, as we've connected into his family to understand his story and who he is, he used to live in an orphanage in Italy, and he was the oldest boy. And at night, they never got enough food. So at night, he used to go around and get sort of berries and fruits from around the orphanage. He used to break out the orphanage and then bring them back. And they think that's what he was doing. He was just replicating that function for his new home sort of in his cottage. And so holding up him, what could be a destructive behaviour? We're holding up who he is and his story and the value and the wonderment of Pops, as opposed to someone that needs to be stopped going to a hedge if you see that. Our palliative care team, when a life passes, everyone that's cared for the person that's passed, they come around the bed, they put an electric candle on there and they reflect on what they'd learned about the person that's just passed, what it encouraged them, what it inspired them, what was challenging, what was beautiful, and a life celebrated. And I think, wow, if that's what we're doing at the end, imagine the care to that moment. And, to me, that's kind of living what we're called to as Christians. There is someone in need. We're using all our skills and experience to give them the best quality of life, to support them, to uphold them, to give them dignity and independence and respect. And I think maintaining that's our challenge. How do we keep maintaining that and happily publicly talk about it? And I think that's, the other thing that we'll be doing. Things like the voluntary assisted dying bill that's coming into New South Wales, we'll be participating in that because we generally think that every life matters right down to the last breath. And palliative care can make a massive, massive difference. And, that's obviously what we're arguing. So, but it's a good challenge to have.
A question from Stephen.
Hi, Mike. How do you respond when you feel disappointed or discouraged, particularly, if you've pursued something vigorously with passion and you see it fail and sometimes with no warning? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, look, there's been times, Stephen, many times when that's the case. And indeed, we've had a sermon series at church in the past few weeks in terms of thankfulness, regardless of the circumstances. And I think that's, I'm not great at it. That's my honest appraisal. But I certainly think that is helpful. If I look at using the greyhounds as an example, in the midst of that, when it's all turning against you, it's really tough. How can you be thankful in that situation? Well, because you're in an incredible role with an incredible opportunity, and there's a chance continuing to help and support people. And this might not be going the way you want, but it is what it is. And I think that sense of perspective as well. For me, leaders kind of get consumed by what is the issue in front of them before them, and they can kind of miss beauty and wonder and relationships and people, and understand there are so many people in need and greater complexity than what you have. One of the things I did as Premier was I took a week a year to take 8 disadvantaged youths on a hike. And, they'd kind of had terrible upbringings, but they were independent living and had a chance to kind of really leap. And I've got 8 mentors, and we took them on these hikes. And I think that was the single most important thing I did as Premier in terms of giving this deep perspective. So I think that perspective is really important as you deal with us.
Thank you. A question from Stuart.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for your service to our state. Every time I drive on one of your roads, I'm thankful. But my question is, we got a new Premier, and no sooner was he installed, but the woke left-wing media was going after him for his faith. I can't recall them trying to go after you for your faith. So what's changed in the years since you left office?
No, well, they did, Stuart, actually. They did go after my faith, and that's one of the interesting things. It was a Sydney Morning Herald, blessed. I mean, I love the Herald, but they were on to me because it was 3 days after. So I think the Saturday Review, it was a review of me and who is this person. And the headline, they went and spoke to Regent College, and they were sort of, oh my gosh, there's some views at Regent College that really need to be kind of brought to light here in terms of the influence on a new Premier. And so their headline was Dangerous Devotion. That's what it was, dangerous devotion. And my chief media guy, Imre, is a wonderful man. He's Jewish, not a Christian at all, Jewish. And he said, like, I just don't understand it. Like, he said, the Christian faith is about thinking of others more important than yourselves. It's about sacrifice, it's service, it's humility. It's, you know, if someone's hungry, you feed them. You know, like, how on earth is that upsetting? Is it like, what do they want you to be? You know, a satanic priest or something? Would that make them happy? So he kind of found the whole thing bewildering, because, like, how on earth is that a dangerous devotion if you're going to uphold and live those principles? So it's a rerun. It's certainly a rerun. I think that the challenge with Dom is he's probably more right. He comes in the right wing faction, so that kind of conjures all types of, you know, other images in terms of the left side. You know, I was probably more in the middle part of the party, but fundamentally, it's one of the things that leaders have to expect. You're going to be attacked. You're going to be criticised. So you might as well be attacked and criticised for who you are and what you believe in. And, you know, that's one thing, I think, you know, and as a Christian, our role is to govern for all. And he said exactly that. And, you know, it's to govern for all. Yes, that's important. That's who I am. But I'll govern for all. And certainly I didn't back away from being explicit in my faith for the whole time of my role for that very reason. And, you know, my encouragement will be the same for him, because that's who he is and that's what he believes. And, you know, to the opposition leader's credit, I saw him say, well, everyone's entitled to have their faith and their views. Why would I attack the Premier on that? I thought it was an incredibly impressive response, actually. So, yeah, they're going to attack him for his faith today, but they'll attack him for something else on Monday, Stuart.
We're just about out of time, but some very quick responses, if we may, to firstly, Aaron.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Mike. Just a quick one. The Liberal government, you know, probably has been one of the better ones we've had, and better ones around Australia. Yet we've had quite, from what seems, you know, anyway, quite high turnover of leader. When you look at history, you know, high turnover of emperors is synonymous with turmoil and strife. What do you kind of put down to this effective governance with quite a bit of turnover at the top?
Yeah, no, I was reflecting on this because I heard people say that it's a bad thing. I don't think it has been, because I think, well, there's two parts. In the practical sense, you know, like social media and the current media cycle, the life of a long-term leader is almost impossible, I think. It is so difficult in terms of the relentlessness and the approach on that. So I think that the context of long-held leaders is going to become much, much harder, full stop. But then more broadly, you know, I see the role of any leader is you have to actually set up, like my role at HammondCare is to get onto my team 3 or 4 people that could be the CEO. And it's the same thing, you know, in the government, like who's coming next? How can we prepare them? What roles? I mean, I put Gladys into treasurer in the expectation that when I left, that's a perfect role to kind of spring into leadership, having already done transport. So there's been a lot of talented people sort of in there. So I think, Aaron, the talent within the team means that transition to happen. So I mean, when Barry left suddenly, you know, I found myself there, but there were still sort of great ministers and great advisors I had. Gladys similarly, and now I think Dom. So I think, provided obviously it hasn't been managed as expected this time, but you know, the talent that's there is undoubted. And to me, the new leader brings an energy and a chance to not just re-energise, but to revision and to recreate government is a good thing. You know, the longer you stay as unchanged, that's when you get stale. I think the change, you know, Barry, myself and Gladys, you know, brought different things into leadership, and Dom will do the same. So I think the regeneration actually can bring benefits as long as the challenge is not perfect, but I think it can be a positive rather than negative.
One last question, which I think does build on what you've just answered, from Constant.
Yep.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for sharing. It is encouraging to hear your story. Something that stood out for me is how there were key individuals along the way that encouraged you or saw your talent and reached out to like call that out. So for example, the professor at Regent, John Howard reaching out to you. I was wondering, how can we as leaders cultivate a culture where we identify, mentor, challenge, and encourage other talented, gifted individuals, especially younger Christians?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Constance, and it really is an onus on us. I think that's a big part of leadership. I do. I think not just identifying your successor, but the talent for the future. And I'm heavily involved in Monash University. It's got a public sector program where they're trying to bring leaders of all political persuasions identified, who will play senior cabinet minister roles, potentially premier roles or prime minister roles. And I'm investing in that because of that very point. Like, I think we need future leaders, and we need to get them thinking and encourage them and try and, of course, I've got some positive lessons also where I've gone wrong and how that can help to try and shape them and grow them. And wherever you are, I think that's really important. And being purposeful. You're right. I've been reminded and encouraged, having received some of those things, to go out of my way to try and identify. Dom, actually, I brought him into cabinet first, and my, words to him, I expect him to be a premier one day. And I've engaged with him and helped him, since that day all the way to the weekend. With advice and support, and I think that absolutely is on us, and as Christian leaders, wherever you are, encouraging those in leadership in a powerful way can make a real difference. So it's a good call out, Constance. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions, and thank you, gentlemen, for your patience as we've gone a little over time, but I figured there'd be still a lot of interest, and of course, thank you so much, Mike, for sharing your dangerous devotion with us and a bit of an insight into your heart. Perhaps there's still, room for another career move at some point, maybe a tilt at Prime Minister, who knows? Not that it's about the role, mind you, as you've taught us this morning. In a moment, we're going to invite Kokong Chan just to close with a very brief prayer. Kokong is a member of the board of HammondCare that oversees Mike's work. But before he does that, just a quick comment that next week, there's the opportunity to join in small groups, wherever you are, whether physically or by Zoom. There'll be a feedback form coming out by email. So please do express your interest. That's really the heart of the fellowship, the friendship that Oliver spoke of at the beginning, an opportunity to get to know others and to share thoughts about what Mike has now shared. And there'll be other speaker sessions coming in the weeks ahead. Kokong, would I invite you now to say a short prayer? I'm going to have to unmute you. I can't see Kokong. He was there a moment ago.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I've been here. I haven't gone anywhere. All right, let's pray. Lord God, we thank you for Mike's sharing with us this morning, the genuine and heartfelt moments that he shared with us. We want to thank you for his servant leadership and stewardship of what you have entrusted unto him. And we pray that you'll help him to continue to live his faith and glorify you, and to serve you by continuing to serve people. And may you help him to keep desiring to help those who are vulnerable. We do pray that you help each of us too, who have been listening this morning, to live these values in our lives as well. May you guide us and keep us safe during these times. May you guide our new Premier, Dominic. May you guide our leaders in this state and in this country with wisdom and with your presence. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Kokong. Gentlemen, thank you for joining, and hope to see you either in the small group or at our next meeting online. Have a great day and a great weekend ahead. Thanks again, Mike.